and it makes no sense for Snoke to be killed like this. Snoke was the most powerful character up to this point. He can sense everything and directly says he can see into Kylo's mind. Why didn't he sense the saber turning to cut him in half? Why didn't he sense Kylo planning to kill him?
Okay, so in the lore of Star Wars, there are normally two Sith Lords at any given time, a student and a master, with the student eventually killing the master and taking his place. That's historically how the Sith have operated, and is what we see in the prequel trilogy, as well as even in the original trilogy. So, doing so early presents Kylo Ren as powerful enough to be the Dark Lord of the Sith, the Master, much younger than other Sith Lords would have done so. It proves his pursuit of power being at its apex quicker than he can surpass his master so quickly. Again, with Snoke reading his mind, he's able to not have Snoke realize who the lightsaber is pointed at until the very last moment, proving himself to be more powerful in the Force in that sense. And him being that powerful when he's much younger is a frightening prospect for how powerful he would be reaching a more advanced age. It paints him as an immediate threat that threatens to become unstoppable if given time. So, in other words, it is a narrative escalation of stakes. And as I said earlier, that is something a long-running franchise is going to fucking do, idiot.
Like, I don't fucking have anything against man. I don't know what her pussy smells like, but I thought it'd be funny.
But I think the most offensive thing about this twist is the missed opportunity. Rian Johnson went out of his way to subvert expectations left and right, but at the one moment where he could have truly done something impressive, he doesn't even take advantage of it. Imagine if in that moment Rey and Kylo completely change sides. Rey falls to the dark side, and Kylo comes to see the error of his ways. It would have made sense with Rey growing angrier over the course of the movie, and Kylo learning to harness his emotions. Rey becoming a villain would have sent shockwaves throughout the entire trilogy. Imagine Finn, Luke, and Leia reacting to Rey falling to the dark side. We could see Kylo trying to atone for his crimes, asking his mother and uncle for forgiveness as the Order is completely turned on its head. The possibilities were just so intriguing, but Johnson just decided to stick to the status quo.
You know, admittedly, I did think about how interesting that would have been myself, and in fact, it would have made what happens in Rise of Skywalker function much better if Rey was the one who wound up giving her up her life. But, well, it's not fair to judge a movie based on what they could have done, but rather judge it for what they did. Sure, them switching sides would have been incredible, but I was already complaining in my mind about there being too much going on in the climax of the movie, so it may have been a little bit too much in my eyes to go even further like that. That, and knowing you would have wound up saying that it doesn't make any fucking sense anyway.
If your argument is that Snoke never mattered and was unimportant because the story is about Rey and Kylo, that's bullshit. By saying that, you're confirming he was a waste of a character who served no purpose in the story. If he really was unimportant, they should have just cut him out.
There's a difference between saying that a character is unimportant in terms of not needing to exist, and saying a character is unimportant in the sense of being easily expendable death for the sake of the story. Part of the difference being that the thing that Snoke really is, a character that should be killed in order to advance the story of Kylo and Rey, but is important to exist, takes a lot more nuance than the Twitter threads I'm betting you're getting your counterpoint straw man arguments from.
This is why you have to carefully consider a plot twist in your work, because if the twist makes the story weaker, it just means you are relying on cheap shock value as a shortcut to get a reaction from the audience. The same thing happened with the 2017 Wonder Woman movie. During the third act, it looks like Wonder Woman killed Ares and ended the war, but the men are still fighting and the guy she killed was just some general. She's then confronted with the duality of human nature, leaving her conflicted about what to do next. And then it's revealed that Ares was actually David the whole time. You know, that guy that you barely saw during the first act? He's the bad guy now. And then he reveals his convoluted plan to restore nature by getting rid of humanity. Boo! This makes no goddamn sense. You are the god of war. If war stopped happening, you wouldn't be a god of anything. Your purpose in life would be null and void. How is exterminating humanity going to increase the rate of war?
You really just stop in the middle of your review to criticize a totally different movie? Fuck, the problem here isn't even that David is Ares either. It's what the actual plan is at the end of the day. Also, read up on your Greek mythology and your DC comics for that matter. He's the god of war because he's violent. Proliferating other people going to war isn't the point of Ares. You would know that if you did any research whatsoever. This isn't the god of war version of Ares. fuck you. I'm skipping the rest of this fucking bullshit.
I don't know what her pussy smells like.
And that's what happens with Kylo killing Snoke. They relied on shock value instead of coming up with a twist that served a purpose in the plot, and the payoff we get is a terrible writing decision. Like telling us how Rey came from nothing and she's just some random character who's given all the power in the universe for no reason.
Actually, especially in terms of that last part, it serves a lot of purpose, even if we ignore the dumb, stupid retcon that's dumb and stupid from Rise of Skywalker. For one, there's this narrative through line in the first two movies that culminates quite a bit in the second movie of not everyone important being part of the same two fucking families, especially since, you know, that used to be true. The theme of power not being tied to blood is expressed with Kylo Ren as well. You know, that hesitation scene I keep bringing up with him hesitating with Leia? That displays his blood restricting his power just as much as it creates it. Even the subtlety of the kid picking up the broom with the Force at the end of the movie is a display that hope doesn't come from the old things, but from something new. Kylo and Rey in this movie represent a light and dark side of that particular concept. Oh, and Rey's parents being no one, actually not that shocking of a twist, at least not at the point that it's revealed it's not. It's actually foreshadowed earlier in the movie with Rey's cave scene, where she asks who her parents are and gets no response. Or, more accurately, a response of nothing. That's part of why Kylo says she probably already knows the answer. She's seen the truth of who her parents were in the grand scheme of things, and doesn't want to admit it. But we're about to get to Rey anyway, so somehow I bet I'm gonna have to reiterate this point several times over. Just a feeling.
And speaking of which, it's time to talk about Rey Palpatine. She's a Mary Sue. Yep, that's pretty much it. She's just a Mary Sue. In The Force Awakens, her capabilities were definitely trending on thin ice. Piloting the Falcon with no flight practice, learning mind tricks out of nowhere, beating Kylo despite never wielding a lightsaber before.
Hey, all of this has a reasonable explanation. I wrote dipshit in my script, but I'm not actually going to call you a dipshit here. Then again, this isn't about The Force Awakens, now is it? You're just kind of going on unrelated tangents about other movies for no fucking reasons. Boy, doesn't that sound familiar. That, or for the sake of a flimsy example of something you've already explained to death.
But there was a sense they were going to reveal some sort of reason for her power and expand upon it. Something that would give her character something to struggle with. Maybe she finds out she's a lost relative of a Jedi and their power passed on to her. And now she has the responsibility of living up to other people's expectations, which puts pressure on her. She has a hard time controlling her powers, and Luke offers to help her harness it. Maybe delve more into her temptation with the dark side instead of just teasing it for one or two scenes. Gradually build her vengeful feelings towards Kylo, causing her to stray from the light, which would put Luke in a better position to confront his past. It didn't even have to be either of those things. Just show us scenes of Luke actually training Rey, instead of just watching her swinging a lightsaber from afar, or giving her a pep talk about the prequels that goes nowhere, or that one lesson about connecting to the Force that ended abruptly because he didn't want to be reminded of Kylo. Show Rey going through actual training and gaining experience for her status as a Jedi to be properly earned. I've seen more footage of Daisy Ridley training to become Rey than Rey training to become a Jedi.
Hey, you know what else had less training footage than this movie of someone training in the ways of the Jedi? The entire original fucking trilogy. Like, we don't really see a whole lot of Luke's training even compared to this movie. More important counterpoint, Luke didn't actually want to train Rey, dipshit. Now I'm calling you a dipshit. That's why the scenes involving Luke being more distant or stopping because Rey reminded him of Kylo. It served a narrative purpose, just not one that you expected the movie to have, and it shows Rey's struggle with the dark side without shoving so far in your face that the movie wouldn't get released on Pornhub under force feeding. See what I did there? But no, a movie's not allowed to be subtle or nuanced, now is it? Or rather, I guess it is if a man is the lead.
And in spite of having no training, no proper understanding of the Force, no meaningful lessons with Luke, and not struggling with anything outside of her identity issues regarding who her parents might have been, which doesn't mean shit now that Rise of Skywalker is a thing, she's become a more powerful Force user than either Luke or Kylo. And at this point, it's become so tiring seeing completely stupid and abject morons to this day, still trying to deny the fact that she's a Mary Sue when all the evidence that she is one is blatantly obvious and staring you right in the face.
Okay, so here's the thing. Whether or not someone is or isn't a Mary Sue is subjective as all fucked. And in fact, I stopped myself short of debunking all of your shit from the first movie because saying she's a Mary Sue doesn't actually mean anything. Hell, the fact that one of your pieces of evidence of someone blindly saying that this is a person agreeing that she's kind of a Mary Sue proves that your hatred for the sequel trilogy is, in fact, an indication of falling to the dark side. So, let's do a little thought experiment here. Let's break down what a Mary Sue actually is and try to give what you're saying meaning. So, the only real definition of a Mary Sue is someone who's unrealistically free of weaknesses. So how much stuff is Rey good at from the beginning? Can be example of bad writing, sure, but completely irrelevant to if she's a Mary Sue or not. So what flaws does Rey have as a character, skills or otherwise? Well, she's stubborn. It's one of the things that leads to positive things happening, sure, but it also led her into the face of unnecessary danger throughout the movies, especially when she tends to be a lone wolf more so than even Poe is. Although, I don't agree with Luke's assessment in the third movie of her being impatient, at least not to as much of a degree as Luke was, for sure. I could certainly say that she shares his recklessness without qualms, in part because of the traits I described. So, the real question is, do these things disqualify her from being a Mary Sue? Your answer, obviously, is no, but my answer is... hey, kind of. She's a bit of a Mary Sue, sure, depending on how you look at her. I see her having flaws that wind up working in her favor, others see a lack of flaws entirely, or operate under a definition of a Mary Sue that cares what skills she has, so they'll look at it completely different from me. I don't think the term Mary Sue is very valuable anyway to just throw out there, and it's better to explain what is badly written about a character instead of just calling them names. However, based on the arguments I see for what makes Rey a Mary Sue, all of this applies to Luke and Kylo Ren as well. So if the rest of the segment is just calling Rey a Mary Sue over and over again, then you know what I'm gonna do at this point, right?
Also, what is with this hashtag? Like, really? Make Star Wars fans great again?
Or, it could be unrelated ranting. Yeah, sure, we'll go with that.
I don't know what her pussy smells like.
But in all seriousness, you cannot make the argument that Rey is not a Mary Sue when it's an undeniable fact that she is one. I have no idea how this is still even debatable at this point, because I've seen Mary Sues who are less of a Mary Sue than Rey. She might as well have her picture plastered on the Mary Sue TV tropes page. Don't believe me? Well, let's take a look at the list, shall we? We already went over stuff in The Force Awakens, but she somehow manages to get even worse from there. She's a perfect swimmer despite never leaving her desert planet. Like, seriously, she might as well be an Olympic swimmer for getting it down so perfectly with absolutely no knowledge of swimming.
Do you mean the 1 second of good form that was followed by flailing around? Right, totally being an Olympic level swimmer. Not at all just the stunt work being done in a safe manner to protect the actor from getting hurt. Fuck right off with that bullshit.
She's able to perfectly pilot Snoke's escape pod and escape the First Order fleet in mere minutes off-screen.
Several explanations for this. One, we already know she can pilot the Falcon, which is more complex than a fucking escape pod. And to go back to The Force Awakens, it's not like she does mechanical salvage or anything to understand the basics of piloting a ship or anything. Oh, and it's not like the other fucking escape pods got away too, considering in time they were busy dealing with tear through the middle of the ship, numbnuts.
She manages to destroy not 1, not 2, but 3 TIE fighters with 1 shot on her very first try mounting the Millennium Falcon's turrets, something that Han Solo himself was never able to do in his prime.
See, that one I'll give you. It's a cool moment, but it is kind of her having a skill that doesn't necessarily make sense for her to have. See, there you go. That's a valid criticism. A few more points, and you might actually have some weight in this 3.5-hour video.
She defeats Kylo Ren on her very first try despite having no training with a lightsaber or the Force, while Luke got his ass kicked by Darth Vader in The Empire Strikes Back after getting some training from Yoda.
Okay, several problems with this, chief of which, I could have sworn you said we were talking about her getting worse in The Last Jedi and not backtracking over The Force Awakens, especially since you already said what was in The Force Awakens, and that would be repetitious, which isn't like you at all. But fine, I'll actively debunk this. Number 1, Kylo wasn't trained with a lightsaber either. He didn't complete his training with Luke. Snoke says his training is incomplete. It stands to reason that Kylo may very well have had less training in lightsaber dueling than the fucking stormtroopers, for fuck's sake. Number 2. This was not an even playing field. Kylo Ren had already fought Finn. Not only did he have to work in order to beat Finn, Finn also wounded him, which would affect his capabilities. Number 3. There's a concept called beginner's luck, and I'm going to explain both the luck aspect and the non-luck aspect behind why this term exists. See, the luck aspect is that luck is a factor in a real-world situation. Someone can stumble upon having the correct answer on accident. That's why people don't just give up because someone's theoretically more skilled than them. But then there's the non-luck factor for the reason beginner's luck isn't a thing. When someone experienced goes up against a novice, it's very possible that because the experienced combatant is expecting optimized tactics, they'll be taken off guard by less optimal tactics that normally wouldn't work. Thus, a beginner and an expert are capable of being on the same playing field because the beginner may try to do something that shouldn't work, but does because the expert wouldn't be prepared to counteract it. This is a concept that gets used in fighting games all the fucking time. Now shut the fuck up about Force Awakens! Aren't you supposed to be talking about The Last Jedi? Good lord!
She's shown to be his equal in raw power despite receiving no proper training from Luke, despite that Kylo did receive proper training from both Luke and Snoke.
While this, in theory, sounds right, the thing to remember is that Rey already displayed a ton of raw power. We already know, based on the lore, that raw power in the Force has very little to do with training, so there's your argument blown away right there and then. In fact, considering the dyad revelation in the next movie, it kind of stands to reason that they would be on equal footing. Hell, it's kind of the same principle behind Goku and Vegeta in Dragon Ball Z. Goku's consistently more powerful than Vegeta if they aren't on equal footing, in spite of the fact that Vegeta has stronger bloodline and trains more rigorously. Same concept applies here, although not really because Rey's not actually low class, but all the more reason that the training gulf matters even less. Raw power in the Force is exactly the thing that should be looked as a Dragon Ball-like power scaling metric as well. And don't get me started on the fact that her understanding of the Force before Luke taught her more was in terms of raw power, and Luke helped her understand where it comes from, which can be really important in tapping into it more effectively.
The Last Jedi takes place only a few moments after The Force Awakens, and with only 2 very basic lessons, she's capable of moving apart dozens of heavy boulders without any struggle, whereas Luke wasn't capable of doing that after weeks of training and 2 years of knowing he was Force sensitive. Luke had far more training in The Empire Strikes Back, and he doesn't even come close to the feats that Rey pulls off. Not even characters like Yoda, Mace Windu, or Count Dooku were capable of pulling this off without decades of training. Both the OT and the prequels give us clear ideas and rules for how Jedi and Sith are trained, and yet Rey is able to excel in these fields 100 times over despite having no instruction. She actively breaks rules set in-universe to achieve feats that weren't properly earned.
On paper, once again, this is a valid point. Rey is able to do things with raw power of the Force that it takes tons of training to do, so why can the boy at the end force lift the broom then? Strange. It's almost like people get the Force more easily now than they did before, dipshit! Oh, there we go, calling you a dipshit again. Yeah, never mind part of the reason that the Force powers were more limited in the past was solely because of the special effects we're capable of producing, so there's production reasons why they wouldn't be doing more. People have an easier time understanding the basics of what the Force does because the stories about it are much more out in the open. Like, okay, let me make a comparison that's not in any way related to what we're talking about since you like doing it so much. So, as I mentioned earlier, in the Powerpuff Girls reboot episode of Power 4, the girls are able to sort of combine with Bliss in order to make a Force Ghost Super Powerpuff Girl. Like, here's the thing. That was completely outside of the realm of what the show had previously done with any of the girls' powers, including Bliss's at that point. It didn't make a lot of sense to suddenly have a team attack that makes Girlzilla in order to stomp over him-me like it's Tokyo in the 1950s. So, that's a power coming out of nowhere. Rey moved rocks good because she has raw power that lets her move rocks real good. Learning quick doesn't make you a Mary Sue, dipshit. It just means the understanding of how shit works in the universe has also scaled up. The math classes I took in school are less advanced than what's being taught now because kids are learning more things at a younger age because we get more of it more quickly. That's what happens in real life too, you ass clown!
Leia, in spite of being Anakin's daughter, can hardly use the Force like Luke can, while Rey is 100 times more talented than either of them. And Finn was trained in weaponry since he was a child. He has more objective experience than Rey, and yet she's shown to have more skill than him at close quarters weapons combat. And the list just goes on and on and on.
Well, I already proved that she doesn't necessarily have more close quarters weapon combat skills in the instance you're talking about, even though I kind of agree that Finn should be better in combat, honestly. Rey, when she realized that she could do Force shit, accepted it as a thing and rolled with it, started doing basic Force things quickly. On the other hand, Luke didn't really know what the Force was until Obi-Wan explained it, and Leia, in essence, didn't believe in it, and at no point in the 30 years between the trilogies was known to practice it. Maybe she did, but obviously she wasn't as rigorous, especially without having a mentor like Luke did. Rey heard the stories of the Jedi already, so she got the basic concept of moving things with your brain parts, which is why is it not hard to understand that characters that can appear later in the timeline have an advantage when it comes to understanding concept than those earlier in the timeline needed explained to them. This, of course, is also discounting the fact that, hey, maybe we don't need to see all of the training because we understand what the training looks like after previous movies showed us these moments. So maybe we can imply the passage of time instead. So many flavors of debunking your ass, so little time. What am I saying? Little time. I can go another 20. Or more. Probably more like 20 hours, honestly.
And it's not just a matter of how much power she has or how much skill she has with the Force. It's also a matter that she has no personality flaws to be worked on. She's not greedy, selfish, egotistical, emotionally unstable, reckless, overconfident, oblivious, naive, lacking intelligence, narcissistic, pessimistic, narrow-headed, arrogant, jealous, and she doesn't have any real lust for power like Kylo or Anakin.
I already debunked this. She is reckless and stubborn. Like, fuck me. We even see her put herself into danger in the first movie in order to save people. Are you fucking joking right now? For how much you want to bring up the first movie to prove your point, you sure are ignoring it when it proves you wrong, aren't ya?
Aside from being flawless in every activity she participates and engages in, she has no characteristics that have to be improved upon over the course of the story. And before you try to defend her by saying, oh, well, Snoke was more powerful than her and she failed to turn Kylo from the dark side, and her subplot is about wanting to know who her parents are and gets upset when she's told she's just a random nobody. Those aren't character flaws. The story was just written to be that way. Those things don't have an effect on her personality, her power level, or how the story treats her.
Except it's the story that's doing these things to her! Like, her going after Snoke and failing was a display of recklessness, and it almost got her killed. It would get her actually killed in the next movie! Are you fucking dumb?
And speaking of which, the way the story treats her in all three movies is the kind of treatment you would expect a Mary Sue to be given. She doesn't suffer any fatal injuries.
Except the one she takes in the next movie, of course. Look, this is a semi-valid point. Maybe she should have gotten more injured in some of her fights. But the reason for that really comes down to a double standard in Hollywood regarding female characters being harmed by male characters that I honestly do not personally agree with. But at the same time, what do people wind up thinking about this series when a male character puts a female character through even emotional distress in this franchise again? What was that earlier in regards to fetishizing abusive relationships? Maybe there's a reason that she doesn't get as many grave injuries and instead shows pain by way of acting ability other than being a Mary Sue, yeah?
They introduce bullshit abilities in The Rise of Skywalker specifically so she can defeat Palpatine at the very end, and so Kylo can save her from not dying.
Look, this I sort of agree with, but it works narratively a lot better than you make it out to. Oh, I mean, the resurrection thing with that, by the way, nobody's actually tried dual-wielding lightsabers to block Force lightning before. It's almost like using multiple sabers is more of a dark side thing, typically, and so it wouldn't wind up getting used for that purpose. The resurrection thing at least came up with a rather steep cost that explains why it wouldn't be done all the time, but hey, bullshit tends to be more passable when you write it with consideration for consequence.
There's no explanation for her powers except she's Palpatine's granddaughter, which they never expand upon. She's instantly liked by all the morally good characters, she's perfectly nice, and she never fails at anything or goes through any sort of embarrassing defeat.
Hey, remember you pointing out the forced comedy in this movie? Including the slapstick comedy? How it made the natives hate Rey? They're cool with Luke. Seems to stand to reason they're morally upright, yeah? Like, most of the good guys in this movie like each other immediately. Most of the characters have only one person who dislikes them from the off. And how dare a character be a nice fucking person? Fuck your kindness, give me blood!
She never has to learn anything. She never has to struggle. She never loses. And she's magically the most powerful Jedi ever. There's no way you can defend Rey from the claim that she's a Mary Sue because it's an element of her character that is completely indefensible.
Except you just pointed out her losing to Snoke. Oh, and her whole thing against Kylo at the end of this movie. Yeah, that's her taking an L. Sure, it's kind of a mutual L. Both of them took an L at that moment, but she's the one who had to retreat. Oh, and she also literally fucking dies, and it costs her the person she worked for at least 2 movies to redeem. Fuck all the way off!
You could enable all the cheats in a video game, giving yourself unlimited health, unlimited magic, unlimited stamina, unlimited ability bars, unlimited airtime, unlimited chain combos, unlimited ammo, unlimited transformation time, invincibility from all enemy attacks, one-hit kills, and you would still be less overpowered than Rey is in these movies.
Okay, I know the point of this is hyperbole, but Rey doesn't take down anyone in only a single blow, so you're objectively incorrect. Also, fuck me, dude. Saying that a character that's invincible is less overpowered than a character that literally dies.
And of course, if you say anything bad about Rey or criticize her by saying she's a Mary Sue, or really anything about Kathleen Kennedy's female empowerment crap, short-sighted fuckheads on Twitter will say you're a sexist misogynist who hates strong women.
See, I don't agree with this. I don't think Rey is outright a Mary Sue. I've explained my actual reasons that I think your assessment isn't 100% correct. But at the end of the day, it's your opinion against mine. And if you still think that, that doesn't automatically mean you're a misogynist.
Oh wait, there is one explanation for how Rey gets all her powers, and if you want to know what it is, you have to pay an additional $20 for the novel version. And apparently, the explanation for her powers goes like this. She has the ability to gain immediate and expert force powers just by touching other force users.
Oh, hell no!
How in the flying fuck does that even work? She gains knowledge and power just by touching people? What is her brain, a supercomputer? Does it copy and download info from another person's brain? Does touching them increase her metachlorian count? Does she just multiply the metachlorian cells in her body and give herself more force powers? I am absolutely stunned that there are still stupid people on the internet trying to deflect how Rey is a Mary Sue, when this is literally a Mary Sue quality. The ability to acquire decades of knowledge and experience available only to a master just by touching them, making all of it accessible to her with no effort or struggle. An ability that, from what I've looked up, appears to be exclusive to only her. No one else in the Star Wars universe has ever done something as ridiculous as increasing their force knowledge and power by physically touching someone. And even if by some chance there was another character besides Rey who did this, it's still a stupid idea because it fundamentally breaks so many rules regarding how force users are trained and how they gain experience.
Well, no, it's not so much that she gets force powers, but rather that she gets memories. How we see aspects of this in The Force Awakens. Remember her touching the lightsaber and seeing those memories? It's a thing she was already shown to do before it even came up in relation to her active force usage, albeit much less directly. It's called psychometry, another ability associated with psychic abilities that force powers have a tendency to draw upon for what they can do. Notably, this is an ability shared by Cal Kestis, the main character of Fallen Order, and it's noted historically that psychometry has a tendency to expose one to the dark side to a greater degree than usual. So a cost for that kind of power. In addition, there isn't much control over what memories you are able to draw from, so it comes down to luck, or writer convenience, whichever you want to call it, whether or not you would actually get something useful. I mean, you can say what you want for the plot demanding Rey's psychometry be as useful as it is, but well, at some point you do have to suspend your disbelief a little bit when you're watching a futuristic space wizard fight set in the ancient past.
Yeah, Rey is basically Mulan from that shitty live-action remake.
No!
Even that dumb mystery regarding her heritage doesn't mean anything because it's constantly getting yanked left and right by Johnson and Abrams. Maybe Johnson originally meant to teach the lesson that you don't have to be special and you can still do great things without having an important heritage. But it doesn't work that way when you put so much investment into the mystery. It's anticlimactic. If you really wanted to use Rey to teach that lesson, then what was the point of that mystery surrounding her parents or where she came from? It's just pointless teasing that goes nowhere.
Okay, so the lesson of not needing to be related to someone important to be important yourself, that needs some kind of conflict. Without building up the reveal of the anticlimax, which is actually a climax of that character arc, as I'll explain in a moment, there's no reason for someone to go away thinking about how the circumstances of one's birth aren't what makes them. Even though Rey being psychometric means that it does matter, but I'm talking about family here, not random inborn force powers. Okay, so let's say Rey's not revealed as a Palpatine in the third movie. You know what they can do? Have Rey struggle with the identity of being no one, of being just a grain of sand in the desert, a single star in the vastness of the galaxy. Insignificant. Even if you use Palpatine as the real villain, you can have her become important and prove that it's not who her parents were that matters. Okay, so I'm gonna do another analogy here. Pokemon the first movie. The end of the movie has Mewtwo come to the realization that it is what one does in life that determines their worth and not the circumstances of their birth. Weird lesson to get from Ash's Pokemon tier resurrection, but sure, let's roll with it. You know why this actually matters? Because we built up to it. We had Mewtwo be jealous of those that were born under different circumstances. The question was raised throughout the movie. Rey seeking to know where she came from, that is a form of doing just that. If you didn't like it, fine. But it was a way of doing that made the movie make sense with what it was presenting. Hell, the reason we needed to put that much emphasis on it was also important. It was to show how much the reveal of her parents being nothing actually hurt her, because it displayed how much this answer mattered to her. She was willing to knowingly delve towards the dark side in order to find it. I don't like the shift back in the third movie either, but it also serves to raise the question of what Rey will do with the truth when she does have a more satisfying answer. She was willing to go towards the dark side if it meant an answer. But what will she do if the answer is welcoming her when she looks beyond the light? You're making me defend the thing that I hate the most about Rise of Skywalker. Fuck you in all of the ways!
Well, actually it does go somewhere by revealing she's Palpatine's granddaughter, which somehow manages to be even worse than what Johnson came up with. Good job, JJ. Good job. You fucking moron. There's actually an interview that Daisy Ridley had with someone where she reveals that Rey was originally supposed to be a long-lost relative to Obi-Wan. And from there, it just kept going back and forth between Rey being someone and Rey being no one until finally deciding to make the last-minute decision that she's a Palpatine. The fact that they flip-flop so badly with Rey like this is just proof they had no idea what to even do with her.
Actually, this happens a lot. The answer is never set in stone until you put it into the work itself. This is part of the reason I, in particular, don't like the Palpatine shift. It feels like a retcon, especially the way they did it, and far too quick of one after they just established the answer. And that's me agreeing with this point, by the way, but the fact that they changed from being related to Obi-Wan to being nothing before completion isn't a negative. Because being related to Obi-Wan kind of doesn't hold as much weight, at least not my eyes, unless you really work to put weight behind it.
The least you could have done was give her a backstory. An actual backstory that establishes her character.
You mean the thing they tried to do in the third movie that retconned what was established about her lineage? So, you're defending the Palpatine twist now, yes? Yes.
Harry Potter, for example.
No.
Now compare that to Rey. Who the hell is Rey? What does she have to do with anything? She's an empty character. The problem isn't that her parents are nobody, at least until this happened. The problem is that she has no backstory connecting her with anything to do with the original 6 movies. Nothing. Zero, zip, nada.
So, more of you talking about the thing you just talked about. Specifically, you mentioned her not being connected to the original 6 movies in any way through her backstory, yes? So let me ask you something. Wouldn't Finn or Poe's backstory connected them to the original 6 movies? Oh, Finn's a stormtrooper. Great. He's First Order. That's First Order being connected to the original 6, not him. The only way for these characters to be connected to the original movies is based on who they interact with, who they know. Rey even trains under Luke, which establishes a connection to the original movies, by the way, and joins a resistance led by Leia, who was in the original movies, and flies the Millennium Falcon. Hey, speaking of which, what was Han's connection to the prequels? This whole train of thought is garbage, and the reason why should be blatantly obvious by now. The whole point of Rey's character, at least as written here, is that she wasn't connected to the story until now, that she was something new, and while on one hand that can paint her as unimportant, on the other hand it can present her as the thing that changes it all. She appears to be nothing, but anyone put into a new situation can bring a different perspective that changes things. But nah, you just decided that Rey's story is invalid from the off because it's not a stereotypical chosen one narrative that Star Wars has been doing for years. Fuck off!
Making her Palpatine's granddaughter was just J.J. Abrams' attempt at a saving throw. She's just some rando wandering around for no reason with no motivation.
So the fact that she was being pulled towards the dark side by the promise of finding out who her parents were, that wasn't displaying her motivation? Look, I even partially agree with you here. She kind of just goes from seeking to survive to fighting to protect people she barely knows at the drop of the hat. And that's a part I don't like. It should have been primarily about herself in her eyes for longer. And yeah, maybe even depict her as being a little bit selfish for a while. But there's a big difference between what you just said and what I just said. I'm asking for the character to shift motivations more gradually. You're saying the character had no motivation, which was a flat out lie. This isn't fucking Bella Swan, my guy.
Even a custom video game character has more backstory. What am I even supposed to say about Rey at this point, other than she's a Mary Sue? Also, don't try to excuse this by saying that Luke was as OP as Rey, so that would make him a Mary Sue too. You're a fucking idiot if you actually believe that. If you seriously have to resort to saying Luke was just as OP as her, you're not defending Rey as a well-written character. You're saying that Luke was just as badly written as she was.
Okay, but when your entire premise is calling it worse than other Star Wars movie, then it's valid to say another Star Wars character has the same problems. The point of that argument is twofold. To point out that the complaint in certain aspects is inherently sexist if you're not willing to call out Luke, or Anakin for that matter, for the same things, and indicate that it should not be something that makes this Star Wars movie worse if the problem exists throughout the franchise. I've said it before. Bad and the worst mean two different things. Can you call out Rey's writing as an OP protagonist in general? Yes. Can you call it out specifically in the context of Star Wars? Well, it's a little bit more debatable when you try to do that.
If Luke was anything like Rey, he would have defeated Anakin on his first try, and he would also be more powerful than Palpatine despite his training being incomplete, and he would have become the greatest Jedi in history after only a few weeks, as opposed to years of experience.
So, since I've already completely gone through your argument of Rey beating Kylo in the previous movie, I'll address the most powerful Jedi thing, both in terms of this movie and in terms of the more powerful than Palpatine thing. So first with this movie, we don't actually know how Kylo Ren stacks up against Palpatine or anyone other than Rey. We saw him deceive Snoke, not really fight him fairly. Not that Snoke was even real, but it's worth noting that Rey wasn't able to be more powerful than Palpatine here because she wasn't more powerful than Snoke, and in theory Snoke should be a less powerful version of Palpatine. So since she was on equal footing with Kylo at this point, it should also stand to reason that Kylo Ren is also not as powerful as a fraction of Palpatine's power, thus why the deception would be needed in the first place. So greatest Jedi of all time? Easily debatable. Now, I can also debate you on the Palpatine part directly pretty easily here. Luke never fought Palpatine. He refused to fight Palpatine for fear of turning to the dark side. That's a very important part of the final confrontation. Luke also survived Palpatine longer than Rey did, and he wasn't even trying to stop it, so we don't actually know that Luke wouldn't have been able to defeat him. So this whole comparison? Completely pointless. You know, kind of like your whole video.
Okay, so recently there's been a couple of things being brought up in the supposed scandal that Rey is a Mary Sue, and I think it's only fair to address them here. At first I thought it could easily be ignored, but I ultimately decided that it's best to address them here to help present clarity on her status. There's some people who are making the argument that Rey isn't a Mary Sue because she was struggling with one of Snoke's guards, and that if Rey is a Mary Sue, then so are Luke and Anakin, because Luke was able to destroy the Death Star without using the schematic, and because Anakin had a high metachlorian count and was an expert pod racer. No, you're just brain dead for believing any of that.
Okay, so before you continue, can I just point out how incredibly awful it is that you call anyone who has a counter-argument flat out stupid? Like, seriously, just address the argument. No need to be a dick about it. And if you are, at least come up with something other than moron or brain dead, you ignoramus.
Rey having a little trouble with one of Snoke's guards doesn't invalidate her status as a Mary Sue. She still defeats Kylo without any lightsaber training, she still became a vastly powerful Force user despite knowing very little about it in the very short amount of time she was tutored by Luke, she still has no personality flaws, she's still treated like royalty by the narrative, she still accomplishes ridiculous feats that no other character has pulled off, she still has that stupid ability to increase her metachlorian count and transmit other people's knowledge of the Force and how to use Force abilities into her brain just by touching people, she still defeats multiple characters with decades of experience over her, she still bypasses a lot of rules in terms of how Jedi and Sith are trained, and she still defeats Palpatine in the stupidest way possible when nobody else was a match for him.
Wow, I was gonna skip this, but jeez. Yeah, no, Mace Windu totally wasn't about to kill him in the prequel trilogy. My god, are you dense. Palpatine's ability to live comes from his ability to deceive and strategize more than his raw power. Stop making me defend Rise of Skywalker, you fucking shit-tinted clop crusader.
And in that same fight with Snoke's guards, she still overpowers them in implausible ways. She kicks one of them, which somehow makes 3 of them fall over. In this exact shot, the guards are attacking her more aggressively than Kylo, yet she's able to defend him while being ganged up on while he isn't doing anything to protect her. Oh, and about that one guard she was struggling with, she quickly defeats him anyway, and she has to save Kylo again when he's the menacing antagonist that's supposed to be challenging her. Yeah, no need for her to be saved by Kylo, she has to do the rescuing in this fight. Twice.
Actually, I can point towards one of the reasons I gave earlier for her having defeated Kylo in the first movie. Unorthodox strategies throwing off someone who is more used to typical methods in combat. In fact, the very thing you state is how Rey gets space, her kicking the dudes away. Yeah, everybody else is just about purely using their weapons and not the rest of their body to fight. She's not sword fighting, she's brawling, and being able to handle someone with superior training and weaponry is probably something you can pick up when you're effectively an orphan scrap trader. Now look, unlike your stank ass, I'm not going to dismiss you calling this evidence of her being OP, because your point is still valid. What I have though is a counterpoint for the reason I come to a different conclusion, which is what I was getting at a moment ago. I'm not invalidating the things you say and just resorting to calling you stupid for interpreting the film differently from me. I'm calling you stupid for so many more important reasons.
But let's move on from that bullshit excuse and focus on Luke and Anakin. Alright, so Luke is supposed to be a Mary Sue because he pulled off that shot on the Death Star without using the schematic. Let's look into that a little more. Luke, in spite of his experience as a pilot, was still getting overwhelmed by Vader and was about to get shot down. The only reason he survived was because of a surprise attack. Luke had to be rescued by Han, who was already one of the best pilots in the galaxy. Now compare this to Rey's first time flying the Millennium Falcon. In spite of having no prior knowledge on how to fly it, she's still pulling off all sorts of ridiculous stunts on her first try. She's practically an ace pilot. She's flying through an abandoned Star Destroyer with little problem while the TIE fighters with years of piloting training are struggling to maneuver in it. And don't deflect this by saying she had previous experience flying other ships, because other ships are not the same as the Millennium Falcon. Even if she gets grazed a few times, she still gets through it in high speed and pulls off drastic maneuvers you would expect to see from Han Solo in his prime. Luke might have pulled off some maneuvers on the Death Star, but nothing as drastic as what Rey is doing here.
Putting a pin partially in the other ships aren't the Millennium Falcon, but a note on that pin, keep in mind what I said about Anakin piloting a fighter 10 years old in the first movie. But part of that I'm going to address now. True, other ships aren't the Millennium Falcon, but you know what they are? Ships. Stands to reason that someone picking up on how to pilot one ship would be able to figure out maneuvers they are able to do in other ships as well. She also, has heard legends of the Millennium Falcon, so it's entirely possible she has some idea of the controls in the first place. She has a massive head start on Luke, who was just given the excuse of Skyhoppers have similar controls. Luke was also in an X-Wing and not the Millennium Falcon. X-Wings go down faster than Millennium Falcon, they have less armor, shielding, and are smaller, so it stands to reason that even if Luke was getting hit just as much as Rey, it was worse for Luke because his vehicle wasn't designed to be able to take hits. Like, Luke also survived over tons more experienced fighter pilots, specifically fighter pilots, mind you, and Vader didn't even come out until Luke had already outlasted several TIE fighters. Kylo Ren himself never came after Rey in a TIE fighter, so there's not really a good one-to-one comparison to make here.
And as for getting the Death Star shot without using the schematics while using the Force, he was being instructed by Obi-Wan. He had to coach him through the situation in order to make the shot. And even then, his concentration is still being broken up by Vader. Luke needed help from both Han and Obi-Wan to destroy the Death Star. It wasn't something that he did on his own.
Rey also didn't beat Kylo or Palpatine on her own. So that already shoots everything you've been arguing in the foot. But, well, let's look real quick at the nature of Obi-Wan's instructions. Just telling him to use the Force, which is why he pulls up the targeting computer. No specific instruction, just encouragement, really, at the end of the day. So, is it really with his help so much that you feel the need to call it that? And even if it is, Luke was operating with a specific goal of something to accomplish, which requires more effort than Rey simply trying to escape. Her singular focus was evading TIE fighters, while Luke had both them and the mission in front of him to concern himself with, so again, not a very good comparison to say Luke wasn't as OP as Rey.
And even without the Death Star feat in mind, there's still plenty of other times in the OT where he gets duped. He was thrown around by some guy in the cantina, he got jumped by a Wampa and barely escapes while nearly freezing to death before Han saves him again, and he barely survives his fight with the Rancor. There are numerous times where he's in danger of physical harm or death, and he suffers defeat consistently in the OT.
You know, other than most of your examples being in the first movie, some of them even before Obi-Wan gives him any kind of training. And I'm not going to go into the emotional pain and torment from Rise of Skywalker, but I will say that you have a point. Rey's failures are much less overt than Luke and Anakin's are, so I can see where most people say that she struggles less. But part of it is that a lot of it doesn't visually affect her as much until the very third movie. She holds herself until she finally breaks down, and yeah, I tend to be like that, so I can relate. She also suffers a lot less physical harm. She tends to be able to take advantage of a situation where she's at a disadvantage very well. So the danger feels less real for her character. I get your argument, but there's reasons, as I stand before, that I really don't agree with it. And unlike you, I'm not going to call you brain dead for saying that Rey's a Mary Sue solely because of the fact that I have a counter argument, because unlike yourself, and apparently most of the brony fandom, I actually have respect for other human beings.
Any victories he got were few in numbers and a result of personal growth. Rey doesn't go through any growth because she has no flaws to overcome, and she just gets her prowess as a Force user gift-wrapped for her. The closest she came to any sort of physical harm was being thrown into a tree, which she recovered from after 3 minutes.
I mean, since we're talking about the entire trilogy, what about the part where she died, dumbass? Boy howdy, that sure does look like some physical harm. And actually, let me bring up a character that can counter your narrative as another reason your no physical harm thing is bubkiss. You know who wasn't put into physical harm in the OT? Han Solo. Sure, he was frozen in carbonite that one time, but let's be real. If lightsaber stabbery doesn't count, that doesn't either. And yet he's not considered a Mary Sue. Why is that exactly? I'm not about to accuse you of misogyny here, don't worry. Although you are deeply misogynistic for reasons I'll get to address in your Kathleen Kennedy segment, but let's just put it away for now. See, Han's struggle in his arc in the OT had very little to do with physicality. His struggles were in relation to emotion and psychology. He grew as a character not because he struggled with physical beatdowns, but with his own mentality. He had mental hurdles that challenged him more than physical ones. That is the same thing we see from Rey's character. She doesn't need to get her ass beaten to a bloody pulp every 5 minutes in order to be a good hero. She can be more capable of keeping herself from physical harm, but still struggle with things mentally. You know, like questioning leaving because she thinks her parents could come back at any time, struggling with the identity of her parents, breaking down in tears at being told that they don't matter. An even harsher breakdown when she finds out who her grandfather was. You know, non-physical expressions of pain. Look, I feel like this trilogy has some problems too, namely too many Han Solo story arcs to sum it up a little bit. But the fact is that these are the reasons why I don't feel comfortable calling Rey a Mary Sue, even though she does in fact have some of the traits of one. Most of those traits she kind of shares with other main protagonists in Star Wars. And even in the case of one place where she has more of those traits, it shifts in a direction that's more similar to Han Solo and Anakin than to Luke. So trying to create a one-to-one comparison here with Luke is really bananas because they aren't going through the same character arc at all.
And as for Anakin having a high metachlorian count and winning that pod race, those aren't evidence that he's a Mary Sue. Those feats don't make him a Mary Sue because he either had help or still ended up losing. Yes, he has a high metachlorian count. And in spite of that high metachlorian count, he still got his hand cut off by Count Dooku and would have died if Yoda didn't come to the rescue.
Hey, so you know how you said that Rey's ability to use the Force was gift wrapped for her because of a genetic anomaly? Guess what a high midichlorian count is? And how exactly did he lose or need help with in the pod race exactly? Because I don't recall that happening. I recall Anakin winning that pod race and going on to, need I remind you, pilot a fighter as a fucking 10-year-old and save the day. Sure, he was trained to use high midichlorian count, but yeah, your reasons for these things not being evident don't mean anything. If a character wins the day all the time because of the power of friendship, they're still a Mary Sue, even if their abilities inherently involving them having help. And you yourself are calling the losses Rey suffers, including death, mind you, meaningless because of a lack of long-lasting effects. So let me just use your argument against you directly so that your shrimp penis brain will understand it. So, Rey's a Mary Sue because she can learn force powers through literal osmosis, right? But throughout her journey, she had help. Not only did Finn give her time to recover in the first fight against Kylo in Episode 7, but Kylo had to resurrect her in Episode 9. And sure, she could have theoretically Mega Man Palpatine's force power, but that's not how anything happened. All force osmosis that happened was consensual, including with a guy that usually keeps himself completely covered up, except in that one scene because who doesn't want to see Adam Driver without a shirt? Am I right, ladies, and also myself? Point being, she didn't just grab people. She was helped in acquiring these powers. And yet, in spite of this broke-ass power, what happened? She loses to Kylo initially in the first lightsaber fight. She loses to Snoke. She loses to Palpatine. She loses at least one fight in every single movie. Sure, her arm wasn't cut off, but honestly, there's only so much rhyming you can do before it starts getting really, really stupid, George Lucas. But the fact is that she did lose. That's the point I'm making. Now, of course, I know your counter-argument to both of these. For the not losing part, it was that she didn't lose enough in your eyes, which is, well, beyond you just minimalizing the suffering of a character that you yourself called a victim of abuse. That's also subjective as 30 kinds of fuck, and may just be that this trilogy didn't want to be as overtly violent as chopping hands off and throwing people into a sand snatch. And as for having help, the only real argument is that she theoretically could have done everything without the help that she had, which, sir, so could Anakin. Do you see why this argument for why Anakin's not a Mary Sue doesn't work? Especially when you made an actual good argument earlier?
Anakin didn't become the warrior he's known as just because he had a high metachlorian count. Having a high metachlorian count doesn't equate to being all-powerful or being a skilled warrior. By that logic, he became a master warrior while he was a child without even knowing it. In spite of his high metachlorian count, he still went through decades of training from multiple mentors and tutors. He went through dozens, maybe hundreds of trials and lessons about the Force and the ways of the Jedi to harness his powers and gain his skills in lightsaber combat. And even with all that experience, he still went through several defeats due to his rash thinking and lack of self-control, or underestimating his opponent. And he had personality flaws that put him on a dark path.
Okay, other than you repeating yourself with something I just debunked, let's address the years of training thing, shall we? Right, so I can't help but notice the fact that you wanted to use secondary material there. You know who hasn't had a chance to have a ton of secondary material? Rey. Of course, you used that earlier, calling her force osmosis thing bullshit, which, to be fair, I kind of agree with. See, force osmosis is something that I would consider evidentiary of Rey being a Mary Sue, and would also argue that her struggle with the dark side could have played out much more directly in the story to mitigate that a little bit better. But I still have one argument in relation to the Mary Sue accusation. Namely, it being meaningless, as I pointed out earlier. When we get to the point of just arguing back and forth about this character being a Mary Sue and this character not being a Mary Sue, my grandma's name was Mary Sue, you fucking cunt, then at the end of the day, we're talking actual critique and turning it into a pissing match. In my review of Powerpuff Girls special, Power of Four, I specifically and explicitly pointed out that while a lot of the discourse referred to the character of Bliss as a Mary Sue, I was specifically avoiding doing that and instead talking about the writing directly and what made it bad. I talked about how by the end of the episode, they were outright saying Bliss was the only one who could do anything. I pointed out specific flaws in how the character was presented. And even at the point where I stated I could only come up with calling her a Mary Sue, I made a point to at least come up with a joke that explained why I felt that way. The fact of the matter is, you shouldn't feel the need to combat people going comparison X, because the term Mary Sue is, as it stands today, and especially in the context you provide, a subjective viewpoint summarized into a catch-all buzzword. This is nothing more than pointless internet mudslinging, and quite frankly, the fact that you feel the need to participate instead of putting out your reasoning for your viewpoint and letting haters hate is making me take you less seriously as a reviewer. Which, given who I'm talking to, is actually an achievement.
From the beginning, Anakin had problems with his emotions out of fear of losing his loved ones. A problem that was made worse because the Jedi Council didn't bother to give him the right guidance, which resulted in him not being able to process the stuff that happens to him.
So I'm just gonna cut off yet another unnecessary plot summary because I want to address that emotions thing. Rey also had emotions to get over, feelings of isolation and lack of belonging. Every one of the three movies, to some extent, had her struggling with a sense of identity as it relates to her heritage. In episode 7, she struggles with the realization that her parents aren't coming for her. In episode 8, she struggles with who her parents are, and the struggle of finding out that they were no one has a clear, visible effect on her. In episode 9, the discovery that she's the spawn of Palpatine gave her tons of grief as well. Identity and lineage conflicts are actually much more central to Rey's character development than the fights. That's why her big moment at the end of the movie isn't even her beating Palpatine. It's her declaring herself as a Skywalker. That's why the movie is called Rise of Skywalker. It's Rey rejecting the lineage she wants no part of and deciding who she is for herself after the struggle of the other movies was of her not knowing who she is or thinking that she is unimportant because of the circumstances of her birth. Oh, and here's another difference. Anakin's emotional conflicts were worsened because of a lack of proper support in that regard, yes. Rey, on the other hand, had people she could begin to slowly call family. So that helped her form an identity from who she is rather than who her parents were. So, you know, it's almost like the story arcs are the opposite of each other, and any real comparison between them is stupid if that's the only point you're making about it. And how the fuck is there more Rey shit? God, shut up!